journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior podcast with Alani Bankhead. Hello, Humble Warriors. Welcome to the end of January. We are going to jump right in with one of the big themes that keeps popping up over and over again that I want to address with you guys. So if you've listened to any of my work in the past or read my book, you know that there are some key imposter syndrome themes that come up. So you know you're suffering from imposter syndrome if you feel like you don't belong, if you think other people don't understand your mindset, even though the future or solution that you're imagining seems obvious to you, you even understand the path to get there and you're trying to communicate it to other people. And these other people are thinking you're crazy, right? It gets you to the point where you're thinking through, am I the crazy one? No, you're not crazy, right? But these thought processes get you down to a place where you start thinking that you're not good enough, you start feeling shunned, you start separating yourself from other people, right? This is all pointing to the fact that you're experiencing a mindset that is not supporting you anymore. So I'm here to tell you, if these thoughts resonate with you, you are actually a visionary. And there are only a very small percentage of individuals in the world who are designed to be visionaries. So your job is to envision and create the solution that the world needs. Other people's job is to support in the creation of that vision in some way. They might be your technical guy who thinks through all the details. There might be somebody who kind of holds you guys back to make sure that you're thinking through every possible contingency, right? We've got our data nerds, like everybody plays a really important part. But for you, when it comes to self-actualizing and thriving in your own life, you need to understand exactly your position in the world, and you need to create a new mindset that is more conducive to you bringing your vision to life, okay? So when we talk about visionaries, we're talking about people who create solutions from zero. So Steve Jobs, great example of this. He invented the iPhone, right? And before smartphones were created, I have no doubt that when he told people, I want to put the personal computer in someone's pocket. And not only that, but I want to allow that computer to facilitate telephonic conversations. Surely people thought he was crazy. And on top of that, people told him that the world didn't need that gift, right? We all had phones in our homes that we could use. And what was the need in having a duplicate phone that you could put in your pocket? It didn't make any sense. Of course, we all know now, hindsight's 2020, he changed the world with his smartphone, and everybody has one, whether it's an iPhone or a different brand, right? Same thing with Thomas Edison. So Thomas Edison was the inventor of the light bulb, right? And he had this amazing quote where he said something to the effect of like, I didn't fail, I just found 10,000 ways that don't actually work. And so this is the type of mindset we're going to be shifting you guys today. And one of the best frameworks I found for this is actually called the infinite game. So if you guys do not know who Simon Sinek is, he's the guy who did the super viral TED Talk called Start With Why. Go check it out. I'm going to put it in the show notes so you can easily find it. But he ended up writing a game about the infinite game. So it's a book that came out in 2018. I absolutely love this book. And the whole concept around the infinite game is based on a theory provided by this guy named Dr. Kars. And he says that there basically are two types of games. So there are finite games and infinite games. And the reality is that most people don't really know which type of game they're playing. And because they don't have the awareness around what type of game they're not playing any game particularly well. So finite games are very easily understood by the common person, right? These are zero-sum games, so usually you have a winner and a loser. There's generally speaking no in between. You have known players. So if you're on the soccer or the football pitch, as my European clients would mention, right? You've got two different teams, and those are the known players. You're not going to be bringing a third team into a known game. You have a fixed set of rules that everybody has agreed to, and you have an agreed upon objective. So, your goal in soccer or football is to get that ball in the appropriate goal area so that you can score a point. And once you score, the maximum number of points by the time the time lapses, then we know who the winner is, right? There's also a beginning, a middle, and an end to these finite games. So at some point, you know that they're going to be done. So I've used a sports analogy already. Those are fantastic ones to indicate what finite games are, right? And then on the flip side, we've got infinite games. And so the concept around the infinite game is we have known and unknown players. So you might start with a set team, but new players can join at any time, and existing players can drop off at any point as well. The rules themselves are actually changeable, so people can play however they want. The objective is not actually to win, but the objective is to stay in the game as long as possible. And we actually play these games every day without realizing it, right? So when we talk about winning at education, you can't declare someone a winner at education. Education is a lifelong journey. And similarly, nobody is declared the winner of a career or a business. This is something that is just an ongoing process, and it's part of a game that you're playing. And you can adjust the rules of the game as you see fit. You can play that game however you want. Now, there is an element of, sometimes you're starting to play a finite game and then we transition to an infinite game, right? So, as an example, you might be trying to get entry into a particular university or school. And so that is a finite game because you have known players, right? There are people who are also competing for the same entry position. There are fixed rules, there are application timeframes, all that good stuff. And there's an agreed upon objective, which is to gain entry into the school. But once you win that finite game and you gain entry into this academic institution, now we switch to an infinite game. Now you're entering into education and learning, and that game becomes infinite. So the rules are changeable, right? You can show up to class, you can not show up to class. You can finagle your way into busting a deadline by making some excuse to your professor. You can study really, really hard if you want to. You can do it in a group, you can do it by yourself. And so, understanding when you're switching gears is really important on in your process of getting to the life and career that you really love and thrive in. And so, I frankly believe, this is my personal belief, that you are the very best at the work that you created for. So there have been trillions of people that have existed throughout the entire course of humanity. Every single one of them is different, right? Even identical twins are different individuals at a soul level. And I personally believe that if you are alive today, it is January of 2025, that there's a reason why you were created and that you have all the tools that you need and you are the very best at doing the work that you were created for. Now, when we think at that high level, that feels really good. That feels empowering, right? The struggle is that most of the world operates at a finite game level. And unfortunately, the ultimate outcomes of finite games are a decline of trust, cooperation, and innovation. And, ultimately, people who are visionaries get very frustrated in these spaces because the outcome you seek is to increase trust, cooperation, and innovation. But most folks operate at victim and anger level, and you don't. One story I have of this is from the days when I was a bodyguard. So formally, the position is called the personal security advisor. And the units that we were on were very resource strapped. We were very limited on personnel. We were some of the smaller teams in the Department of Defense. And there were a number of us, right? So we had the Secretary of the Air Force's team, we had the Chief of Staff of the Air Force's team, we have our foreign dignitary folks, we have some combatant commands that have protectees full time. And these small teams were very like niche and unique within our overall mission and scope. And so unfortunately, that meant a lot of times we weren't exactly the first ones people thought about when it came to resources. And as a result of that, when I first got into the position, the leaders of the other teams, we worked really well together in cooperating so that we could support each other's missions and do it more efficiently. So, an example of this is there were certain resources that all the leaders had to acquire for their folks, right? So we needed medical kits, we needed vehicle kits, we needed to ensure that maintenance was being done on all the limousines and whatnot. And what we ended up doing was we split the responsibilities amongst the team leaders. So one team leader was responsible for organizing all of the medical kits for all the teams and sending those out. Another team was responsible for getting all the vehicle maintenance set up and those dates and information sent out to the teams. And so rather than every team having to expend all this time and energy trying to do all the things, we divvied up labor and we were able to increase not only our cooperation, but our trust in each other, as well as our ability to be creative and innovative in coming up with solutions in a severely budget constrained environment. Now, about a year into this process that was working so well, we had a change of some of the top leaders on the other teams. And there was one leader in particular who was not an infinite game kind of player. They were very zero-sum game focused. It was all about them and their team. They weren't going to expend any other energy beyond what was required of their immediate team. And it showed, right? So they opted not to continue on a particular project that supported all of the teams, which caused each of the other teams to drop out. This was particularly frustrating for me because obviously we're supposed to be on the same team. And ultimately, this was one of the things that caused me to leave active duty because frankly, I was looking around thinking, well, if you guys are my supposed friends, then who needs enemies, right? Like we're supposed to be on the same team, we're supposed to be supporting each other, we're supposed to be outside the box thinkers. But there were some people that were playing these very finite games, these zero-sum games where they thought, if you're winning, then I'm losing, which is absolutely not the perspective of somebody playing an infinite game. People who play infinite games believe that we can all win and we can do it more efficiently. And it's all about finding that right process for everybody to get to that cumulative win. But it requires communication, it requires vulnerability, it requires trust, right? And so, another example of this, since I'm on the military train at the moment, we have stratifications, right? Obviously, evaluations come out every year, and people are fighting for stratifications because they want to get promoted, right? And there's different cultural elements that come into play, but in general, for the Department of Defense, we know that the people who get the top one or two stratifications have a high probability of being selected for promotions. And so within the units themselves, this can create division because now people are competing for finite amounts of resources, which is causing division, which strategically actually hurts our mission, right? When we really should be working together. I'm not saying that that system is right or wrong. Obviously, it can be really hard to measure individual success in a way that, is equal and fair for everybody. So this is a very complicated question, but I'm distilling the basic points down, right? So when you have a finite game, you're going to decrease cooperation and trust and innovation. And so, similarly, understanding the game you're playing, I played a finite game to get hired at this international nonprofit that was focused on anti-child sex trafficking casework. Once I got hired, I had to switch to that infinite game mode. And one of the key elements of playing an infinite game is also that you have to stay in the fight as long as possible, right? So this is why I'm really passionate about doing this imposter syndrome work, is because one of the behaviors and characteristics of imposter syndrome is that ultimately your perfectionism will lead to your burnout. And I've burned out plenty of times in my career. And the detriment of that is that it takes me out of the fight because at some point your body, whether it's your brain telling you you need a break or your body can't take any more and it's going to shut down, it's going to get sick, right? It's going to break down on some level. It's going to take you out of the fight. And to me, that's not how I want to play the game. I want to be in the game as long as possible. And so after I burned out the third time, I really had to take a hard look at how I was playing the game. And I realized that I had some thoughts that weren't serving me or the mission, right? So rest was something I really struggled with for a really long time because I thought if I was resting, then these attacks on the vulnerable were being perpetrated, and it was my job to stop that. But the world presents a perspective that if you're not doing or achieving or succeeding, then you aren't doing the right thing or you're not doing what you should be doing. But when we're talking about an infinite game, the perspective becomes very counterintuitive. So resting is actually conducive to optimizing the work in the anti-exploitation space because when I rest, I can pour from a more full, overflowing cup. I do better work, right? I'm more patient. I'm more creative when I'm better rested. And so for you visionaries, the hard work is not actually in the doing, but it's in the more ethereal spiritual elements. And so that's a perfect segue, actually, because ultimately, when you're playing an infinite game, it does require an element of spirituality. Some of you really don't like that term. We can use the term metaphysical, right? So I define this at a basic level as something that you know to be true that you don't have evidence exists. And so if you're a visionary, right? So you imagine a future at the office or a project resolution that doesn't exist and you make it up as you go. That is an element of you taking something that doesn't exist and creating it. To me, that's spirituality, right? I work with a lot of different types of clients, whether it's leadership development individually or as teams. And I've had the opportunity to work in the architecture field as of late. And it's been a lot of fun. There's such a great group of folks to work with. And one of the things I love about them is unlike maybe some, justice or government spaces where you're creating services, architecture firms create physical, tangible spaces. So they're actually using their brains to create a physical space that didn't exist before. So it's something tangible that we can see, right? And it's interesting talking to architects because they actually think through a lot of the time of what does the physical space need to look like in order to facilitate someone's thriving, right? So the building in and of itself is not just a physical building that provides shelter and warmth, but it's also a place that can be conducive to optimizing someone thriving. That can include color, it can include function and form, right? There's all these really fun elements that come into play. So that's a great example of delineating like surviving versus thriving. These firms could create a box with four walls that are cement and gray, but instead they choose to add curves and shapes and interesting elements, and they might use psychology to their favor to create something that the client really, really loves that really helps the client achieve their end goal, right? Same thing goes for the arts. They're a perfect example for me and one that I love to share, right? So there are movies and shows that I watch that I have such a deep connection with. It's wild to me to think that someone could create something that resonated on such a deep level with me. When I was younger, the arts, like literally going to an art museum, I used to walk around and kind of be like, okay, like, I appreciate that people can express themselves, but this is, I'm not really feeling anything. Am I doing it wrong? Am I broken? That kind of thing, right? Until I went to Paris, I went to the Louvre and I saw this sculpture called Victory at Samothrace, and I'm probably butchering the name, but it's at the intersection of these three staircases. It is from like Greek or Roman era. I mean, just like super old statue. I came around a corner and when I saw her, I was just stunned. There was something about her form, the way the light played off of the surface, the materials that were used, that I deeply connected with this piece of art. I honestly could have taken a chair and just sat there all day and looked at her. And that was the moment that I understood, oh, there's a spiritual connection here that I have with an artist that nobody knows who they are, but I appreciate their work. And I'm so thankful for the themes of strength and beauty that are emanated from this sculpture. And those are elements that for me run through a lot of the work that I do. I recently had a conversation with a client and we were talking about superheroes, and this client really loves Batman. And when I asked them why, they said, well, like the X-Men are cool and Superman's great, but there's something about a superhero that doesn't actually have a superpower that I really, really love, right? So Bruce Wayne is a normal person who had a very traumatic story. His parents were killed, and as we know, if you've watched it, his parents died because they were at this performance and he wanted to leave early, and he and his parents were in the wrong time at the wrong place, and his parents were shot by a criminal. And because of that pain that Bruce Wayne carries, he decided to do something with it and convert it into something for the good. And so he's a vigilante who seeks out, to do justice and hold perpetrators accountable. But this client of mine was talking about there's a darkness and a sadness about him that really resonates with me, right? And so she had this ethereal connection with Batman, and now she doesn't follow any particular organized religion, right? But these are elements that you have a responsibility to explore and identify for yourself and experiment with. And so, one example of like a trial and error process I went through with a past client was there is an individual, so they're an intelligence analyst in the anti-trafficking space, really brilliant thinker. And this person was really burned out. And we were talking about, okay, what would need to happen for them to take a break so that they can recharge and get back in the fight? As I previously mentioned, it can be really hard to step out because you know how important the work is, right? It can be life and death in some cases. And so we were trying to imagine what the spiritual framework looked like for this person, and they actually thought it looked like a clock. So they said, the clock is going. If you open the back of the clock, there's all these gears and levers and things are moving in concert. So I'm like one of the cogs in that clock, and I just need to get taken out. And so as we're exploring this framework, I asked him, okay, that's super fair. It's a clock with a lot of pieces that work together. But with a clock, when you pull that cog out, the clock stops working. And they acknowledged that. And I said, is that how the anti-trafficking space works? So if one person gets taken out, does the entire movement stop working? And they said, no. And so once they had that little aha moment, we were able to pivot to a different framework that gave them the permission, right? So basically, with the clock framework, because this was their spiritual framework they were using in their career, they feared that if they, as the cog, were taken out, that the work wasn't going to get done, that stoppage was going to happen. But as soon as we were able to reframe that perspective into a different type of game, in this case, a type of game where they can be taken out, the game continues, that gives them time to rest and get recharged and get back in the fight. Now we were able to see a shift in behavior, right? And so all of this is rooted in the cognitive triangle, which you can listen to my first couple of episodes where I talk about this. So the concept simply is thoughts lead to emotions, which lead to behaviors. So doing this thought work and understanding your spiritual belief system is really, really important because everything flows from those thoughts. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, what is my spiritual belief system? I don't know what it is. That is totally okay. You are in great company. I love I don't know, because I don't know means that there's a subconscious belief there that's dictating your emotions and your behaviors. And as soon as you bring that to the surface, you can change it, right? So don't be scared of I don't know. I know my high achievers don't like saying I don't know because a lot of times they view that as weakness. But in this position, when you're exploring your psyche and your soul, that's actually a position of power and advantage. And so ultimately, let's say you're hearing me talk about spiritual belief systems and it's really turning you off. Totally cool, no problem. I'm not the person for you. And that's okay. But if this is resonating with you, right? So let's say even if you're listening and you're like, I want to be that way, but I don't know how to get there. You are a visionary. So I want you to listen to that tiny voice in you that's saying, no, this resonates. This is absolutely you. And maybe you don't know how to get there, but that thought that I want you to shift to is, I don't know how to get there yet. So we're going to add that yet to the end, and that's going to get your brain primed to start thinking, okay, what new framework do I have to create in order to allow that vision of a thriving life and career come to life. And so one of the ways that we can start that is through belonging, right? So earlier, we talked about how oftentimes people with imposter syndrome feel like they don't belong. And so this is actually rooted in a scarcity mindset. So there's a limited amount of belonging. And for whatever reason, the gods or the humans have decided that you are not one of the ones who's deserving of that belonging. So if we can switch to the abundant mindset, right, that is going to help you get started on your journey of yet. So going back to that Thomas Edison quote I mentioned, right, he said, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work, right? So do you see how he switched from where a typical person would focus on, I've done 10,000 things and none of them have worked, I'm a failure. He instead chooses to believe, I haven't failed. There's just 10,000 things I've tried that don't work, right? So Edison is asserting that he still belongs in the inventor space, even though he has 10,000 inventions that haven't worked. And of course, again, hindsight being 2020, he invents the light bulb and many other things and becomes one of the most famous inventors ever to have existed. And that's because he had this infinite mindset of, no, I'm just experimenting and I'm on the journey of multiple failures because multiple failures are going to get me to that success, right? So, where do you belong? Is it with your pet? Does your dog or does your cat make you feel like you really do belong, right? Is it with a certain individual? Is it in a certain location? Is there a park or some type of event space where you feel really connected to it? Is it yourself, right? This is something that people that struggle with imposter syndrome actually need to do the work on first in order to really self-actualize and receive the abundance that's out there waiting for you to decide that you're worthy of it, right? So if you struggle with imposter syndrome, there's usually an element where you're devoid or you are separate from your spirit. So your intellect and your soul have a bit of separation, and we need to realign those two. And so, what is one thing that you can do to belong to yourself first if you feel like you're not particularly lovable or likable or accepted? For me on this journey, I literally had to start by looking in the mirror and finding one thing about myself that I liked. And I think it was something like I looked at my shoulders and I was like, I have nice shoulders or something like that. It was something really random. But honestly, as I was scanning the mirror, trying to find that one thing that allowed me to belong to myself, I saw a lot of stuff I didn't like, right? I didn't like the way I looked. I was really unhealthy at the time. And I was really good at judging myself for the things I didn't think I was. But as soon as I looked and found one part of myself that I genuinely liked, I could build on that. And then over time, I started to notice these thoughts pop into my head where you know, oh, if I passed a mirror or something like that, and I'm like, oh, I'm having a really great hair day, or ooh, like my butt looks really cute in these pants, right? And these are silly examples, but these are elements of a shift in your perspective when these surprising and joyful thoughts start to pop into your head rather than the very judgmental ones, okay? But ultimately, I want you to remember that you are one of a kind and you need to find others who are also one of a kind. And this can be hard to do because it requires vulnerability. But I promise you, they are out there looking for you too. And how do I know that? Because I work with all of you guys. And so, if you are looking for a community, the Joyful Money Club is underway. It's not too late to join in. We started in January of 2025, and it's financially directed. So, it's all about understanding how you can create a new financial situation, right? How you created the current financial situation you're in with your thoughts and how you can get out of it. So, it's all about how imposter syndrome wreaks havoc on our financial thought processes. And if you're looking for other resources, check out my life purpose exercise freebie on my website, www.mightysparrowcoaching.com. So if you're listening to this thinking, man, this resonates so much, how do I get started? If you don't know what your life purpose exercise or what your life purpose is, you're going to want to check out this life purpose exercise. And if you do know what your life purpose is, but you feel like you don't really know how to harness your imposter syndrome to work for you, check out my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Power. It's available at all major book retailers. And all the links to everything that we talked about today are going to be in the show notes, including the infinite game stuff. And until next time, humble warriors, please remember the world needs who you were made to be. Thank you for joining us today on this journey to discover how you can harness your imposter syndrome to work for you. I love you guys, and we'll see you soon. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI@mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.